Sulochana Das, and his name is Steve Bryant, his legal name. He'll probably go down in history as the first martyr for the Hare Krishna religion in the West. And the reason he was assassinated is very simple. He was bringing forward documents which had been spoken or written by the founder of the Hare Krishna religion, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Sulochana was bringing forward documents which were questioning the so-called successors to Prabhupada and challenging their status as successors. They decided to eliminate Sulochana and have him assassinated in order to maintain their successor status. So he was murdered essentially trying to re-establish the worship of Srila Prabhupada after his departure. His worship had been taken over by 11 false messiahs who falsely claimed they were the successors to Prabhupada. Sulochana worked very hard to re-establish the worship of Prabhupada, and the result was he was assassinated on May 22nd, 1986. Sulochana was putting together a lot of the crimes that were going on under the so-called 11 guru successors to Prabhupada. He was collating and organizing a list of their crimes, including child molesting, that was going on in the schools, the ISKCON schools. And so he was interviewing parents and teachers and different people, and he was discovering the molestation problem that was going on, and he was reporting on that. He was sending out reports, and he was vociferously complaining about the crimes that were going on. Devotees were being beaten up, they were being driven out of ISKCON, and children were being molested. Drug dealing was going on, this type of thing. So Sulochana was collating this, organizing this, and he was really showing that there was a criminal enterprise going on with these so-called gurus. So obviously this was a big threat to the power of these gurus. They did not want to have someone exposing their crimes. So it was a combination of the fact that Prabhupada's words were being forwarded, Prabhupada's own definition of how he wanted the leaders to act. Sulochana was exposing that. Simultaneously, he was exposing the underbelly, the criminal underbelly of the guru enterprise. So he was like a double-edged sword for the false gurus. So I first began to communicate with Sulochana about these issues pretty early on. In 1978, we were in England together, and I told him that Jayatirtha, the guru there, was bogus, and I was not going to be able to accept the authority of Jayatirtha. And Sulochana said he also could not accept Jayatirtha. He was going to move to New Vrindavan. He thought that Kirtananda was going to be a better situation for him. And I said, beware, because I think, Sulochana, you could be getting yourself into trouble. I think Kirtananda is way worse than Jayatirtha because he's on an isolated farm. He has a community that's out in the middle of nowhere. And if there's a problem there, it's going to be very, very difficult to rectify that, whereas Jayatirtha is in London, and there's a very limited amount of things he can really do without running into trouble with the law enforcement. So I kind of warned Sulochana, do not go to New Vrindavan. But he went anyway, and I think this was a fateful thing that he went there, because had he not gone there, a lot of the uncovering would not have occurred. It was because he went there and got into the Kirtananda regime there. I think that was the reason that he later on knew so much, because by being in the middle of the Kirtananda enterprise, it actually gave him a lot of inside information about how Kirtananda and how these bogus gurus were operating. So as Jayatirtha began to deteriorate more and more, Kirtananda was called upon by the other bogus gurus to come up with some sort of a rationalization for the troubles that Jayatirtha was having. Jayatirtha was being advertised as the Messiah. He was supposed to be as pure as Jesus, but he was having sex with followers. He was taking drugs. He was selling drugs. He was basically having all kinds of problems. And he was engaging his followers in buying and selling drugs, which could have got the ISKCON into trouble. And in fact, some of Ramachar's people got into trouble for buying and selling drugs. So they were worried that this was also going to happen with Jayatirtha, and they were going to be fighting another drug-selling problem on another front. And some of Kirtananda's people were arrested for selling drugs as well. So at New Vrindavan, they began to say, Jayatirtha, his fall down is just like the Maya. It's like the Maya Sita. Sita is the wife of God, actually. So they began to say, Jayatirtha's fall down is just like Sita. This is the Maya Jayatirtha. In other words, Jayatirtha is really a pure devotee. It's just that his illusory form, whatever that is engaged in illegal acts. And this was all coming ultimately from the other GBC leaders, and especially Kirtananda. They were preaching like this. What you're now seeing is the false Jayatirtha. The real Jayatirtha is actually, he's in heaven with God all the time, but his false form, his ghostly form, his illusory form. So in other words, they began these really crazy rationalizations for how pure devotees could act impurely. And this was all backed at the time by Kirtananda's top henchmen, Radhanath and Kuladri and Tapapunj and Tirtha and all of the people at New Vrindavan. They began to say, Wumapati also, they all began to say, yes, this is Jayatirtha's illusory form. Anyone who challenges this, our propaganda is not authorized to be in ISKCON. So in other words, anyone who says pure devotees don't buy and sell drugs, pure devotees don't have illicit sex with their followers, they are supposed to be banned and driven out of ISKCON. So I, warned Sulochana again. I says, be very careful now. This is getting very dangerous. Now they're trying to cover up for the activities of their bogus pure devotees. So this could become very, very dangerous. I think you should get out of New Vrindavan. And so Sulochana did come to stay near me in California for a while, because actually he agreed with me to some extent that he shouldn't really be there in New Vrindavan. But his wife was very persistent. She wanted to go back to New Vrindavan. She did not like being, away from the community and the company and the association and all that type of thing. So, women are very much inclined to be part of a big community. So naturally, his wife wanted to be there. And so, ultimately she convinced Sulochana to move back there, which proved to be a fateful, big explosion in the life of Sulochana, because what happened when he went back, Kirtananda decided that Sulochana was not really, surrendered. He wasn't really dedicated to the guru there. So Kirtananda arranged for Sulochana's wife to be married to another person. Kirtananda helped get a lawyer who, made a lawsuit against Sulochana to get custody of the children. And Kirtananda's thugs came and took Sulochana's children away from him by gunpoint. So there was a big struggle going on. But this was actually going on in many, many cases. There were 100 different marriages which had been broken up by Kirtananda. Children had been kidnapped and stolen at gunpoint, and all kinds of things were going on in New Vrindavan. And this was all well known to many ISKCON leaders. It was well known to Radhanath and all the other Mumapati and all the other big people at New Vrindavan. They now say they didn't know about any of this, but it was going on so commonly. There were hundreds of examples of this. How could they not know? So they knew. They knew, and they supported, and they encouraged that, and they tried to cover it